the emergency bay doors slam open hard enough to rattle the glass. A man is carried in unconscious, soaked in blood, his chest barely rising, while two nurses argue over which trauma room is even safe to use. Someone shouting about a second vehicle, about a bag, about a radio that won't stop crackling. In the corner, a volunteer in plain scrubs stands quietly with a mop bucket, eyes down, trying to look invisible. A doctor snaps at her to move. Then the overhead intercom pops, one clipped sentence, half cut with static, and the entire room freezes. The volunteer lifts the fallen headset from the floor, fits it over her ear like she's done it 1,000 times, and speaks into the mic once. Not louder, not dramatic, just certain, and the chaos starts obeying her. The hospital never truly slept. It only changed its breathing. At night, the halls thinned out, the lights softened, and the voices dropped a half step lower, not out of peace, but out of fatigue. The kind of fatigue that settled into the walls. The kind that made people speak in shortcuts and move on muscle memory. City General was old enough to have a history and busy enough to never have time to talk about it. The emergency department sat like a heart at the base of the building, pumping noise and panic into the corridors. Above it, the floors stacked upward, medicine, surgery, ICU, each level quieter than the one below, each one carrying its own private emergencies behind closed doors. On nights like this, the ER ran on practice tension. A paramedic pushed an empty gurney back through the double doors with the same expression he wore every night. Blank, controlled, slightly angry at the world for still being on fire. A unit clerk leaned over the desk, tapping a pen against a printed census sheet that was already out of date. A security guard sat with one leg stretched out, scrolling on his phone, headset tilted off one ear like the building couldn't possibly need him. The staff moved with speed that didn't look like speed, no running, no shouting, just quick steps and clipped voices. They had learned that panic was contagious. Calm had to be manufactured. In the corner of the ER corridor, near the supply closet that never stayed organized, a woman in plain scrubs pushed a mop bucket slowly, as if she had all the time in the world. No one looked at her for more than a second. She was not on payroll. She wore no hospital logo, no department name, just a simple volunteer badge clipped to her chest, white plastic, black text, her first name printed clearly. Mara. Her hair was tied back tight. Her sleeves were rolled up to the forearm. Her hands were bare, no rings, no watch, no jewelry that could catch on anything. She moved like she had learned to keep her body small in crowded spaces. She did not drift. She did not wander. She went where she needed to go and stopped exactly where she meant to stop. A nurse brushed past her and said, without breaking stride, "Watch your bucket." Mara turned the bucket 2 inches to the side so it wouldn't clip the nurse's heel. She didn't say anything. She didn't look offended. She didn't look afraid. She looked attentive. At the triage desk, 2 nurses spoke quietly over a chart. Room 3 is still blocked. That guy from earlier won't leave. Security? They're watching it. The second nurse made air quotes with her fingers, tired and irritated. Mara's eyes shifted, not to their faces, but to the hallway beyond them. To the half-open door of room 3. To the angle of the security camera in the ceiling corner, pointing down the corridor, but missing the doorway by a few degrees. To the fact that the security guard at the far end of the hall still had one ear out of his headset. She did not stare. She did not linger. She pushed her mop bucket forward and kept moving. No one asked why a volunteer was mopping in the ER at night. Volunteers did all kinds of things, stocked blankets, ran paperwork, brought water to families. They were extra hands when the hospital was short on everything else. And City General was always short. Mara passed the waiting room. A man slept upright in a plastic chair, chin on chest, holding a paper cup. A young mother bounced a baby against her shoulder with mechanical patience, eyes red from being awake too long. The television on the wall ran a muted news segment, anchors smiling, while the ticker at the bottom listed the things that had gone wrong in the world today. Mara's gaze lifted briefly to the front doors. Not the people, not the desk, just the doors. She watched how they opened. The timing, the way they hesitated on the hinge, the gap they left before they clicked shut again. Most people didn't notice doors unless they didn't work. Mara noticed them as a rule. At the nurse's station, a resident leaned against the counter and rubbed his eyes. "I swear, if I get one more admit before sunrise—" "Don't say it," an older nurse warned. "The building hears you." The resident gave a tired laugh, the kind that came out automatically because that's what humans did when they didn't want to think too hard about what they were feeling. Mara slid behind them with her mop bucket, careful not to catch anyone's ankle. The floor under the counter had dried spots where disinfectant had been wiped too fast. She stopped, adjusted the handle of the mop, and swabbed the area in slow, even strokes. Her movements were controlled, no wasted arcs, no splash, no overreach. When she finished, she wrung the mop with measured pressure, as if she knew exactly how much force was enough and how much was too much. A nurse at the station glanced down at her badge and then back up. "Hey, Mara, can you restock the blanket cart when you're done?" "We got hit earlier." Mara nodded once. "Yes, just that. One word, no tone, no irritation, no eagerness. She wasn't trying to be liked, she was trying to be useful." As she rolled the bucket toward the blanket cart, a door down the hall opened sharply. Voices rose, brief, tense, then lowered again. A patient's family member, angry and frightened, speaking too loudly in a place where people learned quickly that loud did not equal heard. Security ambled over, slow, posture loose. Mara's head turned slightly, not enough to draw attention. She watched the guards approach. His hands were empty, his stance squared too late, his tone coming in too casual. The guard was treating it like a customer complaint. Mara's eyes moved to the family member's hands, to the way his weight shifted, to the fact that his jaw was clenched and his breathing was shallow. She watched the distance between them. Then she looked away, because watching too long would become visible. At the blanket cart, she pulled a stack of fresh linens from a bin and loaded them with tidy speed. Each blanket folded the same, each placed with the edges aligned. It wasn't perfection for its own sake. It was order because order could be grabbed in an emergency without thinking. A nurse hurried up, snatched 2 blankets and didn't say thank you, not out of cruelty. Out of tunnel vision, Mara didn't react. She simply kept stacking. A moment later, the unit clerk dropped a pen. It rolled toward Mara's shoes. Mara bent and picked it up before it could disappear under the cart, then set it on the counter without interrupting the clerk's conversation. The clerk paused, noticing the pen, then glanced down. "Oh, thanks." Mara nodded once and turned away. Small acts, invisible acts, the kind that kept a place like this from collapsing under its own chaos. At the far end of the ER corridor, a crash cart sat parked outside a room. Its drawer was partially open, one package of saline hanging out like a mistake someone meant to fix and never did. Mara's eyes flicked to it as she passed. She slowed just enough to push the drawer closed with the side of her hand. Click. She did not stop to explain. She did not look around for approval. She continued forward as if she had never touched it. Near the ambulance entrance, the air was colder. The doors there opened more often, and every time they did, the outside came in. Wind, exhaust, the faint metallic scent of rain on pavement. Mara stopped at the edge of that space and looked down at her bucket. She checked the wheels, the latch, the handle, quietly making sure nothing would fail when she needed it to move. Then, for the first time all night, she let her gaze travel wider. She scanned the corridor, left to right, not hurried, not anxious. Like a habit. Like someone counting exits without calling it counting. A trauma nurse walked past and muttered, "Volunteer shift ends at midnight. You're still here?" Mara answered without turning. "Yes." The nurse gave a small shrug, already forgetting the question as she moved on. Mara remained where she was, near the ambulance doors, waiting for nothing in particular. But her posture said otherwise. Her shoulders were relaxed, yet ready. Her feet were planted in a way that could move instantly without looking like she was preparing to move. Her attention stayed on the space, not the people. The angles, the entrances, the rhythm of footsteps. Above her, the intercom speakers crackled once with a test tone, someone in administration checking a system. The sound made a few heads lift, then drop again. Mara didn't flinch. She listened like it meant something. The hospital kept breathing. The night kept moving. And in the middle of it, the woman everyone called a volunteer stood quietly, doing small tasks no one celebrated, while watching the building the way soldiers watch terrain. because somewhere in the distance, still out of sight, still unnamed, the next crisis was already on its way. The first warning did not arrive as a siren. It arrived as silence in the wrong place. Near the ambulance entrance, the automatic doors were supposed to cycle with a steady rhythm, open for inbound, close tight, lock, repeat. That rhythm was one of the hospital's quiet assurances. Even when the staff were exhausted, even when tempers ran short, the building systems still obeyed rules. Tonight, Myra noticed a pause between the doors closing and the lock engaging. Not long, half a second, but it was new. She watched the next cycle. The doors closed. The latch clicked late again. Myra did not reach for the panel. She did not pull out a phone. She did not announce it. A volunteer didn't get taken seriously for mechanical concerns, and the wrong kind of attention made people defensive instead of careful. Instead, she rolled her bucket to the side and stopped where she could see the seam of the door without standing directly in front of it. She waited for another opening. A paramedic pushed through with an oxygen bag over his shoulder, moving fast, not looking up. The doors opened wide. Cold air rushed in. The doors shut again, half a second. The late click. Myra turned away as if she had simply decided to mop somewhere else. But she was already building a picture in her mind, quietly, piece by piece. At the nurse's station, the unit clerk was on the phone, voice tight. "No, I don't have that name. Spell it again. No, we don't have a bed number yet, because he hasn't arrived yet." The clerk hung up and exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for an hour. She turned, looking for someone to blame. "People call like we can predict the future." An older nurse answered without looking up from her charting. "They call because they're scared." The clerk rolled her eyes. "Yeah, we're all scared." Myra moved behind them with folded linen under one arm. She slid the linens into the cabinet the way she always did, quiet, edges aligned, no noise. As she worked, her eyes caught something on the desk, a staff badge sitting by itself near the keyboard. Blue strap, hospital logo, the name face down. The clerk reached for it, hesitated, and then pushed it aside as if it were clutter. Myra did not touch it. She simply noted it, a badge out of place in a building where badges were access. A few minutes later, she passed the security desk. 2 guards sat there now. One older, posture slumped, one younger, tapping his foot, bored energy leaking out in every movement. The older guard glanced at Myra. "Hey, volunteer." Myra stopped. "Yes." He nodded toward the waiting room. "If you see that guy in the red cap again, tell him he can't be in here sleeping all night." Myra held his gaze calm. "He's been here 3 hours." The guard frowned. So he hasn't caused trouble," Myra said quietly. "He's just tired." The guard gave a dismissive wave, already irritated. "Whatever, it's policy." Myra did not argue. She nodded once and moved on. She had no interest in winning small fights. Small fights made people stop listening when the big ones arrived. At the end of the corridor, room 3 was still half open. The same patient from earlier, agitated, loud, refusing discharge instructions, was now quiet. Too quiet. Security still hadn't resolved it. The door still sat open like an invitation. Myra approached without looking like she approached. She stopped 2 doors away and pretended to adjust a trash bag. From there, she could see inside room 3 through the narrow gap. The patient was standing, not on the bed, not pacing. Standing still, facing the door, eyes fixed on the hallway like he was waiting for someone. A nurse inside the room spoke softly, trying to de-escalate. Her voice had the careful tone of someone trained to keep people calm while her own pulse climbed. Myra watched the patient's hands. Empty. But his shoulders were tight, his jaw set, his breathing shallow. The nurse shifted 1 step closer, thinking closeness might reassure. It didn't. The patient's weight shifted to his front foot. Myra's eyes flicked to the nurse's badge lanyard, hanging loose, an easy grab. Myra moved. She did not rush. She did not run. She walked with the same quiet pace she always walked, carrying a bundle of towels, like she had every reason to be there. She reached the doorway and paused, not entering, just placing herself in the nurse's peripheral view. The nurse glanced up, relief flashing for half a second, until she remembered Myra had no authority. Myra spoke softly, to the nurse, not the patient. "Your lanyard." The nurse blinked, confused. Myra's eyes dropped briefly to the lanyard and then to the patient's hands. The nurse understood. Her fingers closed around the lanyard, tucking it into her pocket in one smooth motion without making it obvious. The patient's eyes tracked the movement anyway. He smiled, thin and sharp. "You think I'm stupid?" he asked the nurse. The nurse swallowed. "No, I'm just trying to." The patient stepped toward the door. Mara didn't block him. Blocking escalated. Blocking gave a person something to push against. Instead, Mara shifted one foot, just enough to make the doorway less direct. A subtle angle. A suggestion of space being controlled. The patient stopped, eyes on her now. "Who are you?" he demanded. Mara met his gaze and answered with the simplest truth. "A volunteer." He laughed, loud and false. "Then get out of my way." Mara's expression didn't change. "I'm not in your way." The nurse took the moment to step sideways, creating distance, putting the bed between herself and the patient. The patient's attention snapped back to the nurse, his real target. Mara spoke again, still quiet. "If you leave the room, security will come." The patient sneered. "They're already here." He flicked his eyes down the hall where the older guard stood, still leaning, still relaxed, still pretending he had control. Mara didn't look at the guard. She looked at the patient and said, "They will come correctly." The words were plain, but the certainty behind them landed. The patient hesitated, just a fraction. And in that fraction, Mara saw something else. The patient's gaze drifting past her shoulder toward the ambulance doors as if he was checking timing. Not escape. Timing. Mara held still. The nurse held still. The patient's jaw tightened. Then he turned abruptly and sat back down on the edge of the bed, forcing calm into his body like a performance. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll wait." Mara didn't relax. People who performed calm were often the most dangerous. She nodded once at the nurse, a silent message: "Back away, keep distance, don't argue." The nurse backed up and kept talking in soft, harmless sentences. Mara stepped away from the doorway, again without making it look like a retreat. She moved down the hall toward the linen closet, as if that had always been her intention. Behind her, she heard the patient laugh again, quieter now, like he had a secret. At the linen closet, Mara opened the door and slid inside. The small space smelled like detergent and plastic packaging. She stood with the door nearly shut, not hiding, just listening. The intercom crackled once. Not a page, not an announcement, a burst of static, then silence. Mara's eyes lifted slightly, focusing on nothing. Static could be nothing. Or it could be a system testing under stress. She waited, counting breath. The hospital continued as if nothing was wrong. Nurses walked. Charts were updated. A family member cried quietly in the waiting room. A resident asked for coffee. Normal. But Mara had learned long ago that normal was often the last costume a crisis wore before it showed its face. She stepped out of the linen closet, closed the door, and pushed her bucket forward again, quiet, invisible. Her volunteer badge swung gently against her chest. And she kept watching doors. At 11:47 p.m., the hospital's rhythm changed. It wasn't dramatic at first. No alarms, no shouting, just a shift in the air, like the building held its breath for half a second too long. Mara was near the ambulance entrance again, relining a trash bin, when the first sound came through the glass doors. Tires on wet pavement, fast and uneven. Then the dull thump of a vehicle stopping too hard. She didn't move toward the doors. She didn't crowd the entry like curious staff sometimes did. She stayed where she was, slightly off to the side, letting the trained people fill the space. Two paramedics burst in with a gurney between them, their faces tight, their movements sharp. "Male, mid-30s, one shouted. "Found down at the roadside, possible blunt trauma, possible penetrating, we don't know yet, hypotensive, unresponsive." The gurney wheels rattled over the threshold. Blood dripped in a steady line from the sheet. A trauma nurse snapped into motion. "Trauma 1, now move." Another nurse was already pulling gloves on. A resident jogged alongside the gurney, trying to catch details. A security guard glanced up late, hesitated like he wasn't sure if he was supposed to lead or follow. Mara stepped backward into the wall, making herself small, letting the storm pass. The patient's face flashed by ashen skin, jaw slack, a line of blood at the ear. His chest rose shallowly, like he was borrowing breaths instead of owning them. But what caught Mara's attention wasn't only the patient. It was the paramedic's eyes. He kept looking over his shoulder toward the ambulance bay like he expected someone to come in behind them. "Any ID?" the resident asked, breathless. "None," the paramedic said. "No wallet, no phone, he swallowed, "just a radio." "A radio?" the nurse repeated. The paramedic nodded quickly. Like a handheld. It was on him, still on. We heard voices. We shut it off." Mara's gaze lifted to the paramedic's belt where something black and rectangular had been clipped, placed there without thought like a reflex. A handheld radio, not medical equipment. Not hospital. The gurney disappeared into Trauma 1. The double doors swung shut. And for a moment, the ER corridor went oddly quiet, as if everyone was waiting to see what kind of night it was going to be. Then the second vehicle arrived. No siren, no ambulance lights. Just the low growl of an engine outside and the sound of a door slamming. A man stepped into the ambulance bay wearing a dark jacket and a ball cap pulled low. He wasn't running. He was walking fast, like he believed speed alone gave him the right to move through spaces that didn't belong to him. He reached the ambulance entrance and stared through the glass. Security finally stood, adjusting their belts like they were remembering they existed. The older guard stepped out first, hand raised. "Sir, this entrance is for EMS only." The man didn't slow. "They brought someone in," he said. "Where is he?" "We can't." "I need to see him," the man cut in. His voice was controlled but tight. "Now." The guard tried to hold the line. "You have to go through the front." The man leaned forward slightly, eyes sharp. "I'm not going through the front." The younger guard took a step closer, uncertain. "You family." The man's jaw worked once, as if he was deciding what to say. "He's mine." The words were wrong, not "he's my brother," not "he's my friend," just possession. Mara stood 10 feet away, near a supply cart, hands still on her mop handle like it was part of her body. She watched without staring, tracking the triangle between the guards and the man. The older guard's posture was loose. Too loose. His hands were visible. His feet were planted square, not angled, no readiness, no plan. The man in the cap kept his hands low and close to his body. Not relaxed. Contained. Mara's eyes dropped briefly to the man's waistband. Nothing obvious. No bulge, no shine, but that didn't mean safe. "Sir," the older guard said again, forcing calm into his voice, "you cannot be here." The man's gaze flicked past him to the trauma doors. "He's bleeding," he said quietly. "You're wasting time." The younger guard shifted, glancing toward the trauma bay as if the patient inside could hear him. Mara saw what was about to happen. The guards were going to argue themselves into moving. They would step aside because it felt easier than holding the line. A hospital was built to treat, not to repel. Mara didn't step forward. Not yet. Because once a volunteer stepped into a security problem, everyone would look. And looking meant questions. Instead, she moved her bucket 2 feet to the side, creating a clean path along the wall, an emergency habit disguised as cleaning. She positioned herself where she could see the man's hands and the trauma doors at the same time. The intercom above them crackled again. This time, it wasn't static. It was a half-formed voice, broken by interference, too distorted to understand. The man in the cap froze, not like someone startled, like someone listening. His head tilted slightly, and for a fraction of a second, Mara saw the truth in his face, recognition. He was expecting that sound. The intercom clicked off. The man's eyes sharpened. He stepped closer to the door. The older guard reached out, palm to the man's chest. "Back up." The man moved fast, too fast for the guard's slow hands. He didn't punch. He didn't shove violently. He simply redirected the guard's arm, slipping past the touch with a smooth twist of his shoulder, like he'd practiced escaping holds. The older guard stumbled half a step. The younger guard surged forward, adrenaline rising. "Hey!" And in the middle of it, Mara heard something else. A faint crackle. Not from the intercom. From the paramedic's belt radio inside Trauma 1, bleeding sound through a wall. The man in the cap heard it too. His eyes darted toward the trauma doors. He was tracking signals. The younger guard grabbed for the man's jacket. The man turned fast, and for a moment his face was inches from the guard's. His voice dropped. "Let go." The words were not loud. They were command. The guard hesitated, confused by the certainty. And that hesitation was dangerous, because confusion made people overreact a second later. Mara stepped forward for the first time, not rushing, not dramatic, just appearing beside the security desk phone like she belonged there. She picked up the receiver and dialed a short internal extension without looking at the keypad, a motion too practiced for someone who volunteered. When the line clicked, she spoke quietly. "Lock ambulance entrance." Now, the person on the other end started to respond, questions, policy, confusion. Mara didn't argue. "Do it." Then she hung up. Behind her, the ambulance entrance latch clicked, late, as before, but this time, the secondary lock engaged with a heavier sound. The man in the cap heard it and snapped his head toward the door. His eyes met Mara's, just for a moment. He looked her up and down, plain scrubs, volunteer badge, mop bucket. Then his gaze narrowed slightly, as if the picture didn't match the action he had just witnessed. Mara's expression remained neutral, calm, unreadable. The older guard recovered and barked, louder now, "Sir, you need to leave. Now." The man didn't fight them. He didn't escalate openly. He took one slow step backward, hands still low, and smiled without warmth. "Fine," he said. "I'll go to the front." But Mara watched his eyes. They weren't leaving the hospital. They were mapping it. He turned and walked out into the bay, the doors shut behind him. The lock engaged a half-second late, but it engaged. Mara exhaled once, small, controlled. And then the trauma doors swung open again. A nurse rushed out, face pale. "We need blood. Now, massive transfusion protocol." The unit clerk fumbled for the phone. In Trauma 1, the patient's life was sliding away. Outside, the man in the cap had not truly left, and somewhere in the building systems, overhead speakers, handheld radios, security channels, something was trying to talk. The crisis had arrived. It wasn't just medical. It was operational. And the hospital, full of good people trained to heal, was about to learn what happened when healing wasn't the only job. The trauma doors closed with a flat, final sound. Inside, the room narrowed, not in space, but in focus. Everyone had a role now. Everyone was too busy to notice who didn't officially belong there. Monitors chirped. The blood pressure cuff cycled again, numbers dropping. The resident called out vitals, voice steady but thin. A trauma nurse cut away clothing, her movements fast and practiced, hands already slick with blood. The paramedic hovered at the foot of the bed, breathing hard, eyes flicking to the radio clipped at his belt as if it might speak again on its own. Mara stood just inside the doorway. No one had invited her in. No one had told her to leave. She stayed where volunteers often stayed, out of the way, near the wall, useful if needed and invisible if not. "Pressure's tanking," the resident said. "We're losing him." "Blood S on the way," the nurse answered. "Where is it?" The unit clerk's voice crackled faintly over the wall speaker from outside. "Blood bank says 5 minutes. 5 minutes is a long time," the attending said, eyes never leaving the patient. "Get access. Now." A second IV attempt failed. The needle slid out with a dark flash of blood. The patient coughed weakly, a sound more reflex than response. The paramedic's radio crackled. Everyone froze. It wasn't loud. It wasn't clear. But it wasn't supposed to happen. The paramedic reached for it instinctively, then stopped, looking at the attending like a child caught doing something wrong. "Turn it off," the attending said sharply. "I did," the paramedic replied. "I swear I did." The radio crackled again, 2 short bursts, like someone testing a channel. Mara's eyes lifted to the device, not alarmed, assessing. "Get that out of here," the attending snapped. "We don't need interference." The paramedic unclipped it and hesitated. "Where do you want?" "I don't care," the attending said. "Just, I'll take it." The words were quiet, not urgent. Not forceful, but they cut through the noise. Everyone turned. The attending frowned. "Who are you?" Mara stepped forward 1 pace, hands open. "Volunteer." The attending's irritation flared. "Then you shouldn't be in here." Mara didn't argue. She simply held her hand out toward the radio. "It's broadcasting. It doesn't belong in this room." The paramedic looked between them, then placed the radio in Mara's hand like he was relieved to be rid of it. Mara turned and walked it out of the room without another word. In the corridor, the sound changed. The ER's background noise rushed back in, phones ringing, footsteps, distant voices. Mara stopped at the wall-mounted comms panel near the trauma bay, set the radio down, and listened. It crackled again. This time, she caught a fragment. Still inside, the words were faint, distorted, but intentional. She reached up and turned the volume down, not off, down enough to keep it from drawing attention, not enough to lose information. Then she keyed the panel mic lightly. "Comms," she said. A pause, then a voice answered, unsure. "This is hospital security." "Ambulance entrance secure?" Mara asked. There was hesitation. "Yes, temporarily." "Front entrance? Open." Mara closed her eyes for half a second, not for long. Ma'am, who is this?" Mara opened her eyes and looked through the trauma bay window. Inside, the team moved faster now. Blood had arrived. Red bags were being hung. The patient's color was still wrong. "We have an external interest in the patient," Mara said. "They're tracking signals. Lock the front entrance. Reroute visitors to secondary access." Quietly. "That's not protocol," the voice protested. "We need admin approval." Mara didn't raise her voice. "You won't get it in time." Silence. Then, reluctantly, "I'll notify." "Do it now," Mara said. "Notify after." The line went dead. Mara turned back toward the trauma bay just as the attending pushed out through the doors, gloves red, jaw tight. "Where did the radio go?" he demanded. "Outside," Mara answered. "Muted." The attending stared at her, processing irritation and fear at the same time. "You can't just—" A nurse leaned out behind him. "Doctor, we need you," pressures responding. The attending hesitated, then turned back into the room. Mara followed him inside without asking. "Hey," the nurse at the door said, sharp. "You can't." "I'll stay out of the way," Mara replied. She did. She moved to the corner near the supply rack, eyes on the room, not the patient but the people, who was overloaded, who was hesitating, where time was being lost. The resident reached for an instrument and fumbled it. His hands were shaking. Mara stepped forward half a pace. "Your grip." The resident looked up, startled. "What?" "Too tight," Mara said. "You'll fatigue." The attending snapped, "Focus." Mara stopped speaking. She had done what she needed to do. The correction had landed anyway. The resident adjusted his hands unconsciously, breath steadying. The patient's monitor showed a slight improvement. Outside, the intercom crackled again. This time, it was clearer. "South corridor, moving." Mara's head turned sharply. She stepped back out of the trauma bay, hand already reaching for the wall panel. "Security," she said. "Confirm movement." The reply came faster now. "We have eyes on a male matching description near radiology. He says he's looking for the bathroom." "Block him from the trauma wing," Mara said. "Do not confront yet." "Who is this?" the voice demanded. Mara paused, fingers resting on the panel. Inside the trauma bay, a life hung in the balance. Outside, the hospital's thin perimeter was being tested by someone patient and deliberate. She could keep pretending. She could stay invisible. Or she could step closer to the line. Mara leaned into the mic. "I'm the one keeping this contained." A beat, then understood. The response surprised even the speaker. Mara straightened. She hadn't revealed anything, not really, but something had shifted. Inside the trauma bay, the attending called time, then nodded once. Okay, we've got him for now." Relief moved through the room like a controlled exhale. Mara didn't share it, because "for now" was the most dangerous phrase in any operation. She returned to her spot by the door, volunteer badge still visible, posture still quiet. The first confrontation had ended without blows. But the lines had been drawn, and the building, old, tired, and unprepared, had just begun to listen to the wrong voice for the right reasons. The hospital did not announce the change. There was no moment where authority was formally handed over. No one said "you're in charge now." That was not how places like this worked. Power shifted in smaller ways, through who people looked at when things went wrong, through whose words shortened arguments instead of starting them. Mara felt it before she saw it. It began at the nurse's station. A unit clerk picked up the phone, listened for 3 seconds, then looked straight at Mara without thinking. "They're asking about access," the clerk said. "Front entrance." Mara stepped closer, voice low. "Tell them it's restricted. Use maintenance as the reason." The clerk nodded and repeated it into the phone without questioning why. Across the corridor, a security supervisor appeared, older than the guards, more rigid, jacket zipped up like it made him official. His eyes moved fast, trying to catch up to a situation already in motion. "What's going on?" he demanded, Why are entrances closing without clearance? Mara didn't answer immediately. She watched his posture, the way his shoulders sat high, the way his hands hovered near his belt but didn't quite know what to do. He was reacting. She needed him thinking. There's an external actor tracking the trauma patient, she said calmly. He's probing access points. If you challenge him too early, he escalates. The supervisor stared at her. And you know this how? Mara met his gaze, not confrontational, not submissive. Because he's already tested the ambulance bay and radiology. The supervisor frowned. Radiology didn't report. He wouldn't give them a reason to, Mara said. He's checking timing, not forcing entry. A pause. The supervisor turned his head slightly, listening to his earpiece as if on cue. His jaw tightened. Radiology just called, he said slowly. They've got a guy matching that description asking questions. Mara nodded once. He's mapping. The supervisor looked back at her, recalibrating. Who are you? A volunteer, Mara said again. He let out a short breath. That's not funny. Mara didn't smile. I'm not joking. Another voice broke in from the hallway, a nurse, breathless. Security, we've got visitors backing up at the front. People are getting upset. The supervisor looked between the nurse and Mara. Mara spoke first. Let them be upset. Don't let them be close. The supervisor hesitated. Old habits fought new instincts. Administration is asleep, Mara said. And if you wake them now, they'll ask questions instead of solving problems. She took a step closer, not aggressive, just enough to anchor the moment. Right now, she continued, your priority is containment, not enforcement, not explanation. The supervisor studied her face. He was trained to look for tells, liars, exaggerators, people bluffing their way through confidence. What he saw unsettled him. There was no urgency in her expression, no desire to impress. No visible fear, just clarity. Fine, he said finally. What do you need? That was the shift, not dramatic, not declared, but real. Mara didn't waste it. Lock trauma wing access points, she said. Not visibly. Use badge-only restrictions. Post guards where they can observe without being obvious. And tell them not to engage unless I say so. The supervisor bristled slightly at the last part, then nodded. And you? I'll coordinate, Mara replied. With what authority? He asked. Mara glanced toward the trauma bay window. Inside, the patient lay surrounded by controlled chaos, blood flowing, machines humming, staff focused. Borrowed, she said, until the patient is stable. The supervisor hesitated one last time, then tapped his mic. You heard her, do it. Mara moved to the wall-mounted comms panel near the trauma bay. She lifted the fallen headset from its hook, the one that usually stayed untouched unless there was a disaster drill. She didn't rush putting it on. She adjusted the band, seated it properly over one ear. The weight of it felt familiar. She keyed the mic lightly. Security, confirm positions. One by one, voices answered. Different tones, different confidence levels, but they answered. Radiology corridor covered. Front entrance monitoring. South stairwell clear. Mara listened to them all without interrupting, building a mental map of the hospital's interior. She overlaid it with what she had already observed. Blind spots, late locking doors, guards who reacted instead of anticipated. She began assigning without announcing that she was assigning. Radiology, rotate 5 meters back, she said. You're too visible. Front entrance, slow foot traffic, don't stop it. Stretch it. South stairwell, swap positions with east corridor. I want fresh eyes there. There were brief pauses, moments where people almost questioned her. Almost. Then they moved. A nurse approached, voice tight. Why are guards standing near ICU? Mara didn't look away from the panel. Because that's where people go when they don't want to be seen. The nurse blinked. Should I tell? Tell your charge nurse nothing, Mara said. Tell her patients are safer this way. The nurse nodded and left, already convinced. Inside the trauma bay, the attending glanced through the glass and saw Mara standing there with the headset, issuing short commands. His irritation shifted into something else, recognition maybe, or at least acceptance. He didn't come out to challenge her. He went back to his patient. The intercom crackled again. This time, the voice was clear enough to understand. Lost visual adjusting, Mara's fingers tightened slightly on the panel. He's changed approach, she said into the mic. He knows he's being watched. "Do we detain?" a guard asked. "Not yet," Mara replied. "He wants a reaction." "Don't give him one." There was a pause, then, "Copy." Mara leaned back against the wall, still standing, still listening. The headset cord brushed against her volunteer badge. The contrast was almost absurd. Around her, the hospital continued its ordinary motions, stretchers rolling, phones ringing, a coffee machine hissing somewhere in the background. But underneath it all, a different system was running now. One built on anticipation instead of response. One that treated the hospital not just as a place of healing, but as terrain. Mara closed her eyes briefly, recalculating. She hadn't revealed who she was. She hadn't needed to, because competence, applied quietly and at the right moment, had its own authority. And now that the room was listening, she intended to keep it that way. The first real complication came from inside the hospital. It always did. Mara heard it in the tone of the next transmission, tight, uncertain, threaded with doubt. "Security to comms, we've got an issue." "Go," Mara said. "Radiology corridor, the male we were tracking, he's gone." Mara didn't react outwardly, no sharp intake of breath, no raised voice. "Confirm last visual," she said. 2 minutes ago. He stepped behind the portable imaging screens. When we repositioned, he wasn't there." Mara closed her eyes, not in frustration, but in calculation. Portable screens meant temporary walls. Temporary walls meant blind corners. Blind corners meant someone had learned the layout faster than expected. "Check stairwells," she said. "Don't run, don't cluster." A second voice cut in, higher pitched. "We have visitors asking why exits are blocked." Mara shifted her stance, rolling one shoulder back, grounding herself. "Keep them asking. Questions slow people down." Inside the trauma bay, the patient's monitor spiked briefly, then dipped again. A nurse called out numbers. The attending answered with controlled urgency. The medical crisis was not stabilizing. It was oscillating. That mattered, because oscillation bred distraction, and distraction was when containment failed. Mara keyed the mic again. "All units, listen carefully. We're moving from observation to containment. Still no confrontation. I want doors closed in sequence, not all at once." "Why sequence?" the supervisor asked. "Because sudden silence tells him he's lost," Mara replied. "We want him thinking he still has options." A pause, then, understood. Mara turned her head slightly and caught the reflection of a nurse in the glass, watching her now openly. The nurse's expression wasn't hostile. It was searching. Mara looked away. Recognition invited questions. Questions wasted time. The intercom crackled overhead, an automated announcement this time, mundane and harmless. "Visiting hours reminder." Something the hospital played every night without thinking. Mara felt her jaw tighten. "Who scheduled that?" she asked. A clerk answered from the desk, confused. "It's automatic." "Cancel it," Mara said. "Now, but now." The announcement cut off mid-sentence. Silence followed. That silence was louder than any alarm. "He'll move," Mara said softly into the mic. "He won't stay still." As if summoned by the words, a new report came in. "South stairwell movement. Male matching description descending." Mara straightened. "Which level?" "Between 3 and 2. "That's wrong," Mara said. The guard hesitated. "Wrong how?" "He wouldn't go down," Mara replied. "Not yet. He wants proximity to the patient, not exit." Another voice chimed in, breathless. "ICU corridor, someone just badge tapped and failed access." Mara's eyes closed for half a second. "Same male?" she asked. "Can't confirm," the voice said. "Camera angle's bad." "Then it's a decoy," Mara said. "He's testing response time." The supervisor exhaled sharply. "You're saying there are 2? "I'm saying there could be," Mara answered. "Or he wants you to think there are." She shifted tactics without announcing it. "Front entrance," she said. "Open one door, keep the other locked." "Open." Someone asked, alarmed. "Yes," Mara said. "He's listening. Closed doors tell him he's late. Open doors tell him he's early." A long pause, then, "Copy." Mara stepped away from the wall and walked the corridor, not quickly, not with purpose that drew attention. She moved like she belonged there, headset on, badge swinging, just another hospital worker doing something no one questioned. She passed the nurse's station. Conversations dipped as she went by, not because she demanded silence, but because people felt it. Inside the trauma bay, the attending looked up again. "What's happening out there?" Mara stopped at the door. "Someone is trying to reach your patient." The attending's jaw tightened. "Can you stop them?" Mara met his eyes. "Yes." That was all she gave him. Outside, a guard's voice broke through the comms, sharper now. "Comms, he's made visual contact. ICU corridor. He's not armed, at least not visibly, but he's not backing off." Mara's voice remained even. "Do not touch him." "He's pushing," the guard said, "saying he has a right." "Rights are loud," Mara said. "Intent is quiet, keep distance." The guard hesitated. "If he crosses, then I will tell you," Mara replied. She turned her head and looked down the ICU corridor with her own eyes. She couldn't see him from here, but she could see the shape of the space, where people would stand, where they would hesitate, where they would overcommit. The nurse from earlier stepped up beside her, voice low. "You're good at this." Mara didn't answer. The guard's voice returned, strained. "He stopped, he's smiling." Mara felt the shift. "Everyone hold," she said. "He's waiting for us to blink." Seconds passed, too many, then another voice, new, uncertain. "Comms, this is maintenance. We've got someone in the service corridor asking about a leak." Mara's eyes snapped open. Service corridor. That was the spine of the building, unmonitored, unloved, always forgotten. "Describe him," she said. "Ball cap, dark jacket." Mara didn't curse, she didn't rush, she simply said, "That's him." She keyed all channels. "All units listen, he's in the service corridor, do not pursue." "Seal doors ahead of him, not behind. Let him move where we want him." "Where's that?" the supervisor asked. Mara looked through the trauma bay window again. The patient lay still now, too still. "We keep him away from medicine," she said. "We move him toward exits that lead nowhere." She stepped forward, closer to the heart of the hospital, headset cord taut against her chest. This was the point where force would be easier. This was the point where someone would want to grab him to end the tension fast. Mara chose restraint instead, because restraint controlled the cost. "Seal service corridor doors in sequence," she repeated. "Slow, predictable." A guard's voice shook. "He'll realize." "Yes," Mara said, "and when he does, he'll rush." And then, Mara exhaled once. "Then he makes mistakes." She stood there, quiet, unremarkable, volunteer badge, still catching the fluorescent light, holding the entire building in a narrow, disciplined shape. The threat was inside now. Contained, but not neutralized. And the next choice would decide whether this ended with handcuffs or with blood on a floor that could not afford it. The service corridor smelled like dust and disinfectant. It ran behind the hospital's visible world. No posters, no signage, no reassuring colors. Just concrete walls, exposed pipes, and fluorescent lights that hummed like they were tired of staying on. Mara stood at the mouth of it, not blocking the path, not advancing. She didn't need to see the man to feel him moving down there. She could hear it in the cadence of footsteps being careful on purpose. "Security," a voice whispered through the headset. He stopped. Mara closed her eyes for a moment, not long, just enough to picture the space. Stopped meant he had reached a junction, a choice point, somewhere the corridor split or narrowed. "He's listening," Mara said. "Everyone stay exactly where you are." A guard exhaled loudly on the channel. "He's 5 meters from me." "I know," Mara replied. Inside the trauma bay, a nurse called out a number that dropped too fast. The attending swore under his breath, caught himself, and leaned harder into the work. Mara felt the pull immediately. If she ended this now, if she ordered the guards in, forced a confrontation, the hospital could refocus on medicine. The noise would be contained. The threat would be someone else's paperwork by morning. But force would ripple. Someone would get hurt. Maybe the man, maybe a guard. Maybe a patient in the wrong hallway at the wrong second. She had learned long ago that winning fast was not the same as winning clean. "Comms," the supervisor said quietly. "We can take him." Mara didn't answer right away. She stepped into the service corridor herself. The concrete floor was cold through the soles of her shoes. The light ahead flickered just slightly. She stopped under it, letting her shadow fall forward, long and indistinct. "Do not follow me," she said into the headset. "Do not close behind me." The supervisor's voice sharpened. "That's not acceptable. You're not armed." "I don't need to be," Mara replied. She took another step forward, slow enough to be deliberate, loud enough to be heard. The man's voice came out of the dim ahead of her. "You're very calm for a volunteer." Mara stopped. "Yes," she said. "You've been moving people all night," the man continued. His tone was conversational now, curious. "You don't sound like hospital staff." "I didn't say I was staff," Mara replied. A pause, then he laughed softly. "You're wasting time, your patient's dying." Mara didn't deny it. "Yes, that doesn't bother you?" he asked. "It does," Mara said. "That's why you're not getting closer to him." She could see him now, half-lit, standing where the corridor widened slightly. His hands were still low, still controlled. His eyes were sharp, evaluating her the way she had evaluated him. "You think you're in control," he said. Mara shook her head once. "No, I think you're impatient." The man's smile faded. "You don't know what he has." "I know what you want," Mara replied. "And I know you won't get it here." Silence stretched between them. On the headset, a guard whispered, "Say the word." Mara didn't. Instead, she stepped sideways, opening the line of sight behind her, revealing nothing but more corridor, more emptiness. "You can leave," she said to the man. "Now, no one touches you, no one chases you. And if I do, then you stay," Mara said. "And the longer you stay, the more attention you draw." The man studied her face, searching for something, fear, doubt, bluff. He found none. "You're not a volunteer," he said finally. Mara's answer was quiet. "Not tonight." The man's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked past her, calculating distances, angles, response times. She could almost see the decision forming. Then, somewhere behind Mara, a nurse cried out, sharp, frightened. "Comms," a guard barked. "ICU," visitor collapsed. Panic spreading. Mara felt the cost land immediately. If she stayed here, the corridor remained controlled, but fear would bloom elsewhere. If she left, the man would move. She chose the harder thing. She keyed the mic without looking away from him. Medical response to ICU. "Security, hold positions." "Hold," the supervisor snapped. "You're exposed." "I know," Mara said. She took one step back, just one, showing the man's space, not weakness. "This is your moment," she told him. "If you rush me, you'll get through, and then you'll be responsible for what happens next." The words weren't a threat, they were a weight. The man stared at her. His breathing changed, slightly faster now, not fear, pressure. Behind her, the ICU noise swelled, then settled as staff took control. Mara waited. Finally, the man exhaled sharply, like someone letting go of a plan they'd invested too much in. "This isn't over," he said. "No," Mara agreed. "But it's not here." He stepped backward, slow, never turning his back on her. When he reached the shadow junction, he paused once more. "You're expensive," he said. "Someone paid a lot to make you this way." Mara didn't answer. He disappeared down the corridor, footsteps receding, then gone. Mara stood where she was for 3 full breaths before touching the headset. "He's disengaging," she said. "Track only, no pursuit." Relief flooded the channel, uneven, controlled, incomplete. Mara leaned her shoulder briefly against the cold wall, just long enough to feel the ache she'd been holding back. She straightened. The cost had been paid, not in blood, but in risk she alone had carried. And the night was not finished yet. The hospital did not relax when the man disappeared. It tightened. Mara felt it in the way voices on the headset stayed low but alert, in the way guards stopped shifting their weight and began standing still. Disengagement did not mean resolution. It meant the board had changed, and everyone knew it. "Track only," Mara repeated. "No chase, he wants a mistake." "He's heading toward the East Service exit," a guard reported. "Slow pace." "Let him," Mara said. "Keep him moving." She walked back toward the trauma bay, her steps measured. Not hurried, not delayed. The corridor lights reflected off the floor in long white bands, and for the first time that night, people stepped out of her path without being told. Inside Trauma 1, the patient's monitor gave a long, steady tone, not an alarm, not reassurance, just time passing. The attending looked up as Mara entered. "We're losing him again." Mara nodded. "I know." "How?" The attending snapped, then caught himself. "Never mind." She didn't answer the first question. She moved to the side of the room where the equipment carts clustered, eyes scanning. Blood was flowing. Access was tenuous. The patient's chest rose unevenly, like the effort was costing him more than he had. Mara leaned toward the attending. "If he destabilizes, where do you move him?" The attending frowned. "I see you if we can keep him alive long enough. And if you can't," the attending hesitated. "We don't talk about that." Mara didn't press, she didn't need the words. She stepped back out into the corridor and keyed the mic. "Security status, target nearing East Service exit," the supervisor said. "Still not running." Mara looked down the hallway toward ICU. She pictured the route from trauma to intensive care, the turns, the choke points, the places where a stretcher slowed. "He'll move when we move the patient," Mara said. "He's waiting for that signal." The supervisor was quiet for a moment. "Then we don't move the patient." "We will," Mara replied, "just not the way he expects." She shifted channels. "ICU, this is comms, prepare a decoy transfer." There was confusion on the other end. "A what?" "Empty gurney," Mara said. "Monitors attached, 2 staff, full visibility." "That's risky," the ICU charge nurse replied. "People will panic." "Yes," Mara said, "but not the right people." She turned back to the trauma bay window and watched the attending work. The man inside was not going to wait for plans to finish. His body was already choosing. Mara made the next decision quickly. "Trauma," she said into the mic. "When you move him, take the service route, not the main corridor." The attending looked up sharply. "That corridor isn't cleared." Mara met his eyes. "It will be." The attending searched her face for doubt. He found none. 5 minutes, he said. Mara nodded and stepped away, already moving. "Security," she said, "seal East Service exit when he reaches the corner." Quietly. "That traps him," a guard said. "Yes," Mara replied, "with choices." The headset crackled. "He's picked up pace." Mara stopped at the junction where the service corridor met the old loading hall. She didn't block it. She didn't hide. She stood where the light was strongest, visible on purpose. "He'll see you," the supervisor warned. "Yes," Mara said. "That's the point." The man appeared at the far end of the hall, walking fast now, jaw set. He saw her and stopped short, surprise breaking his control for the first time. "You lied," he said. "No," Mara replied. "I delayed." Behind him, the service exit doors closed with a soft, heavy sound. Not a slam, a decision. He turned, checked the handle, then looked back at her. "You think this ends here?" Mara tilted her head slightly. "I think you're out of time." He glanced past her shoulder. Down the main corridor, the decoy gurney rolled by, monitors beeping, staff moving fast, all eyes on the spectacle. The man's attention snapped to it. That was the mistake. "Now," Mara said into the mic. Lights dimmed in the loading hall, not dark, just wrong enough to disorient. Doors along the side locked in sequence, creating a narrowing funnel. Guards did not rush him. They did not shout. They stepped into place. The man turned, recalculating, breath coming faster now. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Mara didn't argue. She held her position, hands visible, voice even. "I know what you're trying to avoid." "And what's that?" "Being irrelevant," Mara said. The words landed harder than any threat. Behind her, out of sight, the real transfer began, quiet, controlled, through the service corridor he no longer had access to. The man lunged not at her, but toward the narrowing gap. A guard stepped in, firm, controlled, blocking without striking. "Stop," the guard said. The man froze, surrounded now by stillness. Not chaos, not violence, control. Mara watched his shoulders drop a fraction as he realized it. The fight drained out of him, not because he was beaten, but because the room would not give him anything to push against. Sirens sounded in the distance, faint but approaching, not hospital alarms. Something external. Mara keyed the mic one last time. "Local authorities en route, maintain distance." The man let out a breath and looked at her again. "Who are you?" Mara answered honestly. "Someone who keeps rooms from burning down." He shook his head once, almost amused, then sat on the floor, hands visible. When the authorities arrived, it was quiet. Efficient, no cameras, no shouting. Mara stepped back into the shadows as they took him away. Inside, the patient reached ICU alive. Barely. The building exhaled, slow, controlled. Mara removed the headset and hung it back on its hook. She straightened the cord, small habit, then turned and walked down the corridor. No applause followed her. No one stopped her. And that was exactly how she wanted it. By the time the sun began to thin the darkness outside the ambulance bay, the hospital had returned to its usual posture. Not calm, just functioning. The trauma bay had been cleaned. Fresh sheets, new instruments. The floor scrubbed until no one could tell where blood had pooled and where it hadn't. The machines that had screamed all night now hummed softly, patient and indifferent. In ICU, the man from the roadside lay still beneath warm blankets and controlled light. Tubes threaded into him like careful compromises. His breathing was mechanical now, borrowed from a machine that never tired. Alive, but only because a dozen small decisions had landed the right way. Mara stood at the ICU window for a moment, watching the rise and fall of the ventilator bellows. She didn't step inside. That space belonged to the medical team now, and she had never needed to cross lines to know where she stood. Behind her, voices carried softly down the corridor. That wasn't protocol. I know, but it worked. Administration's going to ask questions. They always do. Mara walked away before they noticed her listening. At the nurse's station, a charge nurse was filling out incident paperwork, pen moving fast, eyes tired. A security supervisor stood nearby, jacket unzipped now, posture looser than it had been all night. She didn't even hesitate, he was saying quietly, like she'd already run the scenario. The charge nurse snorted softly. People like that don't hesitate. Still, he said, lowering his voice. She's not even, he stopped when he noticed Mara approaching. There was a moment, just a fraction of a second, where he looked like he was going to call out to her, to stop her, to ask something. Mara met his eyes and gave a small, polite nod. Nothing more. He nodded back, almost involuntarily, and let her pass. At the front desk, the unit clerk rubbed her temples and glanced up. Hey, she said, uncertain. They're saying admin wants names for the report. Mara paused. For what? For who authorized the lockdown, the clerk said. Who gave the instructions? Mara considered the question, not because she didn't know the answer, but because she understood its weight. They can list security, Mara said, and the attending. The clerk frowned. But you, I was helping, Mara replied, like always. The clerk opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Okay, she said finally, I'll write it that way. Mara thanked her and moved on. In the break room, a resident sat slumped over a paper cup of coffee, staring into it like it might explain the night. He looked up when Mara entered, surprise flickering across his face. You, he said quietly, you told me to adjust my grip. Mara nodded. That helped, he said. I didn't even realize my hands were shaking. Mara offered a small smile. It happens. He studied her, curiosity sharpening. You do this somewhere else? Mara shook her head. Not anymore. He seemed to sense the boundary and didn't push. Well, he said, clearing his throat, thanks. Mara nodded again and left him to his coffee. At the security desk, radios crackled with routine updates now, shift change chatter, boredom creeping back in. The older guard from earlier avoided her eyes. The younger one watched her openly, something like respect and something like confusion mixing in his expression. She didn't address either of them. She stopped by the supply closet, returned the mop bucket to its place, and rinsed her hands at the sink. The water ran clear. Her volunteer badge lay against her chest, scuffed now, the clip bent slightly from where the headset cord had caught it. She straightened it. The hospital doors slid open as she stepped into the early morning air. The city outside was waking up, cars starting, lights flicking on in apartments, people beginning days that had no idea how close the night had come to breaking. Behind her, City General stood unchanged. Brick and glass. Old systems patched together by people doing their best. The man in ICU would never know her name. Most of the staff would forget her face. And by the end of the week, the incident report would read like a procedural success: security coordination, medical response, containment achieved. No mention of a volunteer. Myra adjusted her jacket and walked toward the bus stop without looking back. The cost of the night sat quietly in her chest, not pride, not regret, just weight, the kind that never showed on paper. Morning settled into the hospital without ceremony. The lights did not change, the halls did not brighten. Shift change came and went the way it always did, through tired nods, clipped handoffs, and paper cups of coffee left half-finished on counters. Myra sat alone on a bench near the side entrance, the one most people forgot existed. She had not rushed to leave. She had learned long ago that leaving too quickly invited questions. Staying just long enough let things return to their natural shape. Inside, the ICU hummed steadily. The patient's numbers were fragile but holding, not stable, not safe. But alive enough for the next set of hands to try again. That was as much as anyone could promise. A nurse stepped out of the unit and stopped when she saw Mara. The nurse hesitated, then walked over. "They're saying he might make it," she said quietly. Mara nodded. "Good," the nurse shifted her weight. "You didn't stay for the report." "I wasn't needed," Mara replied. "That's not what—" The nurse stopped herself. "Never mind." They stood in silence for a moment. Finally, the nurse said, "Security asked if you'd be back." Mara looked down at her badge, the plastic worn thin at the edges, the clip bent. "I volunteer when I'm asked." The nurse searched her face again, the same way others had all morning, trying to place her, trying to name what they had felt without understanding it. "Okay," the nurse said at last. "Well, thanks." Mara inclined her head and watched her go. A few minutes later, the security supervisor appeared, jacket folded over one arm. He stopped several steps away, respectful now. "They're closing it out as internal coordination," he said. "No external incident." Mara met his gaze. "That's better for everyone," he nodded. "If anyone asks—" "They won't," Mara said. The supervisor gave a short, humorless smile. "You always this confident?" "No," Mara replied. "Just careful." He considered that, then extended a hand, half offer, half gesture. Mara did not take it. She simply said, "Have a quiet shift." He lowered his hand, not offended. "You too." Mara stood and adjusted the strap of her bag. She unpinned her volunteer badge and held it for a moment before clipping it back on. It was a small thing, lightweight, easy to overlook. Inside the building, alarms would sound again tonight. Someone would make the wrong call for the right reason. Someone else would save a life and never talk about it. The hospital would continue, patched together by discipline, exhaustion, and people who understood when to step forward and when to disappear. Mara walked toward the exit. As the doors slid open, a young orderly pushed a cart past her and said, without looking up, "Excuse me." Mara stepped aside. Outside, the morning air was cool and ordinary. Traffic moved. People argued softly on phones. A city carried on, unaware. Mara paused at the curb and looked back once, not at the building, but at the reflection in the glass. Plain jacket, tired eyes, volunteer badge catching the light. Nothing about her asked to be remembered. She turned and walked away. Behind her, City General returned fully to itself. No spotlight, no credit, just a room that hadn't burned down.